I'd now like to turn to Air Commodore Anthony Hindmarsh, CSC, who's the Director General of Workforce Design and Reserves Air Force. Air Commodore Tony Hindmarsh was commissioned in the Royal Australian Air Force as Administration Officer and served in a wide range of administrative and staff postings, including with the United States Air Force Personnel Operations Agency in the Pentagon. He transferred to the RAAF General Reserve as a wing commander in 2004 and commenced a career in the Australian Public Service, including Director General Governance and Assurance, Defence Material Organisation, Chief Audit Executive and Head Reform Division, Defence Material Organisation. Air Commodore Hindmarsh was posted to the Reserve Branch Air Force to implement the total workforce management model in Air Force, and has also undertaken the role of Director General Workforce Design. Air Commodore Hindmarsh has a Bachelor of Business, Personnel and Economics, a Graduate Diploma in Information Systems, a Master of Business in Human Resource Management, and a Master of Arts in Strategic Studies. He is a distinguished graduate of the United States Air Force Command and Staff College, a graduate of the College of Defence Strategic Studies, and a graduate of the Harvard Business School Advanced Management Program. Would you please welcome Air Commodore Hindmarsh? Thank you.
Thank you all for the opportunity to speak with you. Today, I'll focus on the Air Force approach to developing and sustaining a balanced, affordable and contemporary Air Force through its novel use of the total workforce system, a system that combines permanent and reserve members as part of the Air Force and Defence Integrated Force. Air Force has had a very strong tradition of reserve involvement since its formation. However, in more recent times, Air Force has primarily relied on its reservists to support broader Air Force outputs through a multiplicity of roles, without an overt statement of the specific intent for reserves. Acceptance of the Suakin recommendations for adoption of a total workforce model was the turning point for Air Force reserves. Air Force pioneered the transition from the total workforce model, a static framework, to invoke the total workforce system in 2016. This provided Air Force with an embryonic flexibility and agility to meet current and future workforce demands. The TWS not only acknowledges that people are our most important asset, but to attract and retain the right people, Air Force needs a contemporary, flexible and agile workforce environment. For individuals, the TWS recognises that there is a life outside of Air Force. To help individuals achieve the right balance between their personal commitments and service responsibilities, the TWS introduced the service spectrum, known as service categories 2 to 7. These offer more options in the way people can serve over their lives. For commanders and workforce managers, accessing the workforce potential across the service spectrum offers new options to generate the required capability effects. Air Force is now focusing on how best to design our future people element of capability using the TWS to minimise vulnerability to people shortfalls while enhancing the Air Force's attractiveness as an employer of choice across a person's working life. And now I'll turn to how the Air Force implementation of the TWS is instrumental to Air Force supporting the broader defence from the perspective of Air Force in its second century. So what does the future Air Force look like? There are only a handful of Air Forces around the globe that are truly capable of delivering the full spectrum of air and space power. Of these, there are even fewer that can do so through a joint and integrated framework, a framework that includes, through design, our sister services, the many other elements of capability across defence and government, and with our allies and partners. The Air Force is emerging to join this very small cadre that can deliver this full spectrum. We are a relatively small, yet potent Air Force, which is joint and integrated by design, now and into the future. Air Force is transitioning to a networked force capable of delivering air and space power effects for the integrated force. At the same time, the global's rules-based order is under pressure, and we find ourselves in an increasingly competitive and less predictable geopolitical environment. So what is the future role of our Air Force in this rapidly evolving and increasingly ambiguous geostrategic and geopolitical realm? The answer to that question is complicated. As the Chief of the Defence Force has been quoted, the first so what to this is that the traditional NATO phasing model, which articulated a binary view of peace and war, that is, a linear approach, is no longer fit for purpose to deal with political warfare and actions in the so-called grey zone. If we are waiting for a traditional declaration of war before we are prepared to employ our platforms and systems against those that seek to compete with us, then we will always lose the strategic advantage. So how do we keep the advantage? From the viewpoint of air and space power, we have incredibly capable and exquisite platforms. For many years, our mindset was locked into how these platforms force generate to fight and win in an advanced warfight. But I pose a different challenge to you. How do we in Air Force best understand and conceptualise how these exquisite and advanced newest generation Air Force and air and space power capabilities best function and contribute to whole of government outcomes in environments short of kinetic armed conflict? This requires us to concentrate less on advanced warfighting as a singular outcome and focus on how Air Force can help Australia to shape, deter and respond. So what exactly does this mean for Air Force? Noting that a simplistic model of peace and war no longer adequately describes the geostrategic environment, Air Force must be prepared to contribute to defence and the joint force in ways that provide the maximum strategic effect across the spectrum from cooperation to conflict. High-end warfighting remains a core air power function. However, an environment of strategic competition demands military effects that provide much broader strategic utility. In an environment of increasing strategic competition and ambiguity, malign actors may exploit the grey zone to avoid clear escalation points that legitimise the traditional use of military effect. Air Force must be able to design and redesign, shape and reshape, invoke and orchestrate evolving and disruptive air and space power effects within a whole of government framework to provide opportunities for statecraft. Our capabilities must be able to expose malign activity, providing our diplomats with the leverage they require to influence the calculus of other political actors, while exposing them to broader regional and international pressures. This epitomises the emergence of hybrid warfare and operating in the grey zone of conflict, characterised by ambiguity of aims, actions, attributions and actors. This is a highly creative and challenging emerging context and requires our people to be innovative and operate at the leading edge of thought, to understand how to employ air and space power beyond just delivering a kinetic effect. Future air and space power will be delivered in a more joint, connected and complex interconnection of multinational domain capability providers and enablers. In an air and space power sense, this is also about subordinating the primacy of the platform. Platforms are effectors. In parallel, many of our current platforms and systems will be adapted, evolved and revolutionised as part of this more integrated suite of capability effects. Now, this will require cultural change in terms of reimagining the qualities, attributes and skills we value in our people. We need to develop air power strategists, experts and practitioners who can envision strategy and mission pathways across the panoply of national power. This will also require Air Force to develop non-traditional elements of combat mastery, but essential in this increasingly technology-enabled future. Of course, in doing so, we cannot compromise the foundational skills and air-mindedness of our combat mastery, so we also need to make best use of the total workforce system and enhance career management to develop these traditional and non-traditional aspects of technical and social mastery over the duration of a redefined career for our people. Through a future-focused meshing of knowledge, skills, experience and attributes, Air Force will increasingly foster a greater adaptability and agility to prepare for the known unknowns and unknown unknowns. The TWS is a significant enabler for attracting, retaining, developing and accessing this broadening range of skills and the most contemporary thought and practice, be these people, reserve or permanent members. Air Force will use disruptive air and space power effects that can operate in concert with and best exploit our exquisite capabilities. Simultaneously, we must be prepared to act today and tomorrow while preparing for and investing in operationalising the defence capabilities across the next 20 years, as outlined in the 2016 Defence White Paper and the Defence Capability Assessment Program for Structure Plan Update 2020. The future employment of air and space power will be integral to our thinking as we require our people to act effectively in the grey zone as part of the joint force to synchronise and manoeuvre through all domains and across the conflict spectrum. So how then does the modern Air Force influence this Indo-Pacific region that is now recognised as a global centre of gravity region to enable our government's national interests? Through the cumulative mixture of soft and hard power exercised by an educated and intelligent force of air and space power strategists, experts and practitioners drawn from a total workforce system comprising a largely integrated force of reserve and permanent members, and they will be following a dedicated Air Force strategy through 5 lines of effort. And those 5 lines of effort are delivering air and space power as a component of the joint force, developing an intelligent and skilled workforce, deepening relationships and strengthening our engagement, evolving our culture, and building agile and coherent governance. The Chief of Air Force has recognised that we are partway to realising this contemporary and integrated Air Force. We have the tools and we are learning how best to exploit them. Our task now is to ensure we have the intelligent and skilled workforce working within the right culture and behaviours to harness these tools effectively across that full spectrum of conflict. Every reserve and permanent member of the Air Force is expected to embrace this paradigm shift, to provide the highest level of air and space power to defence and the Joint Force in support of government objectives now and into the future across the second century. Thank you.